Hi everyone, Miss Moxley here today for your recording. I've got the agenda up here on the screen. Let's quickly go through it, and then I've got a lot to cover today. So you guys are completing Orbits of the Planets lesson and quiz today. And then Tuesday you have Asteroids, Meteors, and Comets lesson and quiz. Wednesday we'll meet for our live session, and then you have the Dwarf Planets lesson and quiz. Thursday you have your Solar System module exam, so you want to be sure that starting Wednesday you go back, look at your quizzes, and make sure that you're studying from your notes. And then Friday you'll start a new module, Brief History of Humanity, lesson and quiz, and then you'll have your notebook check on Friday. Alright, so this past Friday, you guys talked about planets, so I want to discuss planets with you today, but I want to just quickly go over these objectives and point out just some of these keywords. So the objectives: be able to organize the planets in their correct order from the closest to the furthest, have knowledge of the characteristics of the gas giants, which are the outer planets, have knowledge of the characteristics of the terrestrial planets, which are the inner planets, and then knowledge of the asteroids in orbit outside Mars and in Jupiter's orbit. So you should be able to do those as of Friday. So once you finish the lesson Friday, you should have been able to do those on your own, those objectives. And then your keywords are some of your vocabulary terms. If you don't already have them, make sure you have them in your notes defined, and then give examples if you need to. All right, so when we're talking about our solar system, we are talking about 8 planets. 8 planets total, and then if we were still talking about good old Pluto, the dwarf planet, we would have 9. Alright, so with our planets, we've got half and half. We have half terrestrial and half which are considered Jovian or gas. So our terrestrial planets are our rocky planets. They consist of rock and metal, and they are Mercury, Venus, Earth, of course, and Mars. So these are our 4 terrestrial planets. And then we have our Jovian planets, which consist of Jupiter, Saturn, you can say Uranus or Uranus, however you want to say it, and Neptune. Alright, so those are our 4 Jovian planets. And let me just quickly talk about the differences between terrestrial and Jovian planets. So the 4 terrestrial planets are closer to the Sun, and their consistency is of rock and metal. So rock and metal, these items, these elements that create this rock and metal, have a higher melting point. And because they're closer to the Sun, because these elements that make up these planets have a higher melting point, that means these planets are able to form closer to the Sun. Now our Jovian planets are further away from the Sun and consist mostly of gas, things like helium and hydrogen. So these elements, helium and hydrogen, have a lower melting point. So they are further away from the Sun, because if they were too close, they would melt. They wouldn't be able to form. So further away because they're colder, because they are gas. All right, they wouldn't be able to form if they were too close to the Sun. That's why close to the Sun we only have our rocky planets, our terrestrial planets, and then further from the Sun we have our Jovian or gas planets. It all has to do with those melting points in terms of those elements. All right, so you need to be sure that you know the planets in order from the Sun. So you should be able to list those off. And they are Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and then we have Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And then of course we would have Pluto. Alright, so be sure that you can name these planets in order. And let me just show you here. Just a comparison, a side by side. I like to pull up Google Images from time to time, but be sure that you can name these planets in order. So Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and then Neptune. All right, so let's keep going. You also needed to be able to, after you're done with this lesson, talk about some of the characteristics for each of the planets. So with Mercury, there is no atmosphere, all right? And it has two sides, one that's facing the sun and one that's facing away, depending on its rotation. And the side of the planet, Mercury, that's facing the sun has a 400 degree Celsius temperature. So that's the sunny side, and that's really hot. And then the night side, or the dark side, is extremely opposite. So there's a great temperature range in terms of the sunny side and then what would be considered the night side of Mercury in its rotation. So it has a great range of temperature, and you should be able to discuss that as one of the main characteristics, and that has to do with it being so close to the sun. Now, Venus, it is similar in size to Earth. It has a retrograde orbit, which means it orbits counterclockwise. Okay, so if you were to look at the hands on the clock, instead of going with the direction of the clock, counterclockwise is opposite of clockwise. So it's the opposite of how we would tell time. And it also has the slowest rotation of any of the planets. Goodness, I'm full of typos. Then the third planet from the sun is Earth, and it is the largest in diameter in terms of our terrestrial planets. And we live on Earth, so we know it has atmosphere, we know it has liquid water, we know it has oxygen, we know it has all of those wonderful things and holds life. So Mars has seasons that are twice as long as seasons found on Earth. And this has to do with its orbit, because its orbit takes twice as long to orbit the sun. All right, Mars also has mountains and valleys, just like on Earth. And it also has frozen water, which I'm going to abbreviate as H2O, and carbon dioxide as CO2, carbon dioxide. However, life cannot sustain on Mars because it has low atmospheric pressure. And Mars also has 2 moons. All right, so those are the characteristics of the terrestrial planets. Now let's talk about the characteristics of the Jovian planets. Just the main characteristics. We're just talking about the main characteristics. So continuing our way out from the sun, we've talked about Mars. We would move on to Jupiter, and it is the largest planet. It is a gas giant, and it consists of mostly hydrogen, but it also has helium. And Jupiter also has 67 moons, okay? So that is a lot of moons in comparison to some of the terrestrial planets. And it also has active volcanoes and has a red giant spot, which is considered to be a storm. Scientists have been watching this storm for several years now. So moving right along to the next planet, we have Saturn. And Saturn, as we know, has rings which consist of ice and rock. It has 62 moons. The largest moon, which is called Titan, is larger than Saturn itself. All right, so Saturn, you guys are probably familiar with Saturn in terms of those characteristic rings. Next, we have Uranus, which also has a retrograde rotation. so meaning it's counterclockwise. That should say retrograde orbit, rotation, same thing. It also has rings just like Saturn and moons, but it is tilted sideways on its axis. All right, so that is a very specific characteristic to Uranus, is that it is tilted sideways on its axis. Oops, and I spelled tilted wrong. Sorry, guys. All right, so then moving along, we're moving to Neptune, and it is the 4th largest planet. It is the coldest planet at a negative 218 degrees Celsius. All right. So in terms of this lesson, guys, be sure that you can distinguish between terrestrial and Jovian planets, so those two different types of planets. And when I say Jovian planets, I'm referring to those gas planets. There's 4 of each. Be sure that you can discuss melting point in terms of the elements that compose those planets found in each category. So category, I'm saying terrestrial or Jovian. And then be sure that you can discuss some of the main characteristics for each planet from this lesson. All right, guys, that is it for today. If you have any questions or if you need any help with anything, of course, don't hesitate to reach out. And I will see you guys Wednesday for your live session. Have a great rest of your day.